Two generations, one future. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Two Generations, One Future, a two-gen summit for Central Indiana. I'm Ann Mertlow, President and CEO of United Way, and I'm delighted that you are here with us to listen, learn, and share information during this special convening of experts, educators, direct service providers, practitioners, and community leaders around the two-generation approach. I'd like to start with some basics to level set our day together. Two-Gen is a whole family approach that focuses equally and intentionally on the children and the adults in their lives. Walking alongside a family is a learning endeavor. We know that some of you come to your work with a child-focused model. You are working on ways to integrate services for their parents and caregivers. Others of you come to your work with an adult focus, and you have stretched your model to incorporate their children and formulate partnerships to offer family-focused opportunities. Still others offer services for the entire family and are striving to learn how to build on family assets and grow the array of opportunities available to them. We believe that families are whole and capable. They can meet their full potential when given the opportunity to succeed, and the barriers that stand in their way can be removed or overcome. Ascend at the Aspen Institute is the foremost thought leader on two-gen approaches. We believe in their theory of change, which focuses on 6 interrelated elements that support economic mobility and family prosperity. They are, number 1, early childhood education, number 2, K through 12 education, number 3, post-secondary and employment pathways. Number 4, economic assets. Number 5, health and well-being. And number 6, social capital. Individual families need sustained opportunity and integrated services in each of these areas to be able to be successful in any one of these areas. For example, to thrive in education, a child needs to be healthy. To succeed in employment, a parent needs stable economic assets. Most families can't do this alone, and they shouldn't have to. A social fabric needs to be in place to enable their prosperity. As a community, we need to invest in quality systems that impact families, things like education, workforce, housing, healthcare, transportation, and more, to ensure that opportunities exist and barriers are removed for families to thrive. In addition to the elements of two-gen, I want to lift up 2 principles that are critically important to the approach. First is the value of family voice. In just a few minutes, you will hear from Donna Thompson Bennett from the National Parent Leadership Initiative, who will speak to this in more detail. This is an element of the work where we at United Way still have much to learn. That is why I'm excited to share that later this year, we will kick off a Parent Advisory Council to better integrate family voice and to inform our work and that of the sector. The second principle that I want to ensure we say aloud from the start, and we make intentional throughout this work, is that the work be informed by an equity lens. The data tells us that a higher percentage of households of color live in poverty and ALICE, asset limited income constrained and employed. And during the strong economic times pre-COVID, the number of white households struggling to make ends meet was going down, even as the numbers for African Americans, Latinx, and Asian Americans were going up. We have to be thoughtful and informed in our approach to meet BIPOC families where they are and with what they need as we continue to work to break down the barriers put in place through systemic racism over hundreds of years. Our partners at Edna Martin Christian Center, Indianapolis Urban League, Flanner House, and others are leading the way. I hope that you can take the time to hear their stories later today. Looking ahead to today, for those that were with us 2 years ago for our first two-gen summit, you'll recall our focus was to learn more about the practice of integrating services to serve families. We set out to create a space for participants to meet one another for potential partnerships. And we hoped to renew a sense of energy to engage in two-gen solutions for our communities. Excuse me. From the feedback we received, we knew we needed to convene a second two-gen summit. The timing couldn't be better as United Way of Central Indiana officially closes out our Great Families 2020 initiative. We're eager to share our results, our findings, and our lessons learned with two-gen. Internally at United Way, Great Families 2020 began as a concept in early 2016. At that time, we were learning more about this promising practice of the two-gen approach, and we were asking ourselves, would this or could this work in Central Indiana? And could it be the future for how we scale impact in our community? As we all know, for decades, the human services sector has worked so tirelessly and diligently to lift families and alleviate poverty in our community. We've always been united on this front. We've invested heavily in programs like the Centers for Working Families as an example. But what we were missing was the true test of integrating all of the services that a family might need to reach their own goals in life. Externally, I'll never forget that email message I received from the Federal Social Innovation Fund in late 2016. Great Families 2020 was given the great green light to proceed with a multi-million-dollar matching grant. We then selected 8 sub-grantees through a competitive bid process who would partner together in specific high-need areas in Indianapolis. All of these organizations are with us today, and we'd like to start by thanking them for their incredible work and partnership for Great Families. They are Community Alliance of the Far East Side Cafe, East 10th United Methodist Children and Youth Center, Edna Martin Christian Center, Englewood Christian Church, Hawthorne Community Center, John Bonner Neighborhood Centers, Marion County Commission on Youth, or McCoy, and Martin Luther King Community Center. 4 years later, we have results to share from the 789 adults and 1,121 children enrolled in the program. Overall, families reported meaningful improvements to their average monthly incomes and improvements to their physical and mental health. Parents said they were better prepared to provide for their children. Families were better able to work through challenges together. And families were more likely to engage in their communities. What we don't have yet is data surrounding early childhood education results for enrolled families. With the cancellation of educational assessments caused by the pandemic, this data collection was paused. However, we are pleased to see good participation from these kids in pre-K and early childhood education programs, and we all already know the evidence is strong that those children will be ready for kindergarten. Thanks to our research partners at the IU Public Policy Institute and the Polis Center at IUPUI, you can dive deeply into the quantitative and qualitative analysis of the Great Families 2020 program. Just go to greatfamilies2020.org for all of the resources. But we all know this isn't a quick fix. Upward economic mobility for families is a long-term strategy. Resiliency takes time. One of the Great Families program participants said it best, "I'm not going to be in this program forever. I'm learning every day, and at the same time, I'm planning for the long term." And she's right. United Way's journey with two-gen doesn't end with the close of Great Families 2020. In fact, every step of the way, we have valued the input we've received from partners, practitioners, coaches, and the families themselves to improve how we further implement this work and scale it for greater impact. Two-gen is already at the heart of our Family Opportunity Initiative, which has invested millions in organizational partnerships in Central Indiana to further the practice of two-gen, and we're seeing some promising results so far. In 2019, United Way has invested nearly $10 million into over 20 organizations working to reduce intergenerational poverty in Central Indiana through our Family Opportunity Fund, one of 3 overarching impact funds to support individuals and households that find themselves struggling to make ends meet throughout Central Indiana. Hundreds of children, youth, and their parents have been struggling through a series of integrated wraparound supports, including early childhood education, e-learning supports, financial coaching, career coaching, health screenings, parent cafes, and much, much more. To share a few specific examples with you this morning, an early childhood education partner has engaged their families by providing adult education and job training through partnerships with community centers and adult literacy service providers. Another organization has supported hundreds of homeless refugee families through a housing and case management approach. Additionally, a former Great Families 2020 recipient scaled their efforts to increase access to high-quality early childhood education program for families, provided employment coaching and assistance for more parents, and increased access to services that focused on mental and physical well-being for whole families. All of these partners had one thing in common: a commitment to the individuals, families, and communities they serve. There are many, many stories I could share with you this morning, but there are a few I'd like to lift up. At 32 years old, Rachel, a mother of two and educated in accounting and medical administration, expected to be in a career and settled by this point in her life. Instead, she was just trying to survive. After escaping an abusive relationship and suffering through identity theft, Rachel's home became her car. Her children were safe at a relative's house, but she couldn't care for them without finding a home, gaining employment, and starting over. Through the Tuchen services provided at Indianapolis Urban League, Rachel was referred to a shelter for a safe place to stay and worked hard with her income and support coach to complete a budget, professional plan, and family success plan, and eventually secured a training credential to further develop her skills and secure employment. Today, Rachel is working as a pharmacy clerk and building skills and experience that support her training as a pharmacy technician. She has reunited with her children, secured housing, and continues to participate with her children in programs and services offered by the Urban League. In addition to providing Tugen client services, many organizations and partners have increased their knowledge base and scaled their work to stabilize and mobilize more families toward economic mobility. For example, Lutheran Child and Family Services, a Family Opportunity Fund partner, has joined a national collaboration working to stabilize families and promote partnerships that lead to transformative changes in service delivery models through the sharing of insight and expertise across a community of practice. Lutheran Child and Family Services are one of many organizations lifted up for their innovative practice and thought leadership in the field of Tugen work by Ascend at the Aspen Institute. Lutheran Child and Family Services and many of the organizations represented here today have joined together to build a community of practice with one thing in mind: families. Building a community of practice is essential to scaling the work and touching more families. That's why United Way convenes local partners on a monthly basis to share best practices with one another and learn about new approaches and tackle shared challenges. Additionally, with every family opportunity grant we make, we offer technical assistance and capacity supports for organizations to continue to learn and grow their own work. We are so proud that today at this summit, you will see and hear about the work of 12 different local partners that are paving the way and sharing their learnings with you. You will hear about their successes and also their challenges. There is so much for us to learn together, and I am grateful for their partnership in this work and their help in making today's summit a success. Right now, Tugen is considered a promising practice, meaning the evidence of success is still growing. I like that word, promise, because it evokes a feeling of commitment and hope. We are committed to breaking down barriers and strengthening systems that support families. We have hope for families, knowing that they want and will work for what's best for their children. We will keep building that evidence of support for this approach because we owe it to the families in our community who just need that next opportunity, that access point, that cleared pathway to meet their fullest potential. We are so grateful to the donors and supporters who give so generously to make this important work happen, and to our entire community, for when a family succeeds, our community as a whole grows stronger. It is now my pleasure to introduce Sarah Van Slambrook, United Way's Chief Impact Officer, who will then introduce our keynote speaker for today's summit.
Thank you, Anne, for that great introduction to 2Gen and United Way's approach to supporting whole families. I am really excited about all the learning that lies ahead of us at the summit. Thanks to each of you for joining us today. And before I get to the content and the introduction of our speaker, I also want to thank our team who has put this together. Anne mentioned the many organizations who have worked with us on this. I also want to thank our team members, and especially Whitney Fields, who has been tirelessly pulling this together. It is certainly a team effort to make something like the summit come to life, and we are really proud to walk alongside so many partners to make it happen. So thank you. Today, you are going to hear about family coaching, data-informed practice, integrated services, and social capital, just to name a few of the many topics that are covered in breakout sessions. Woven throughout the day, you're also going to hear about the two key principles that Anne mentioned, family voice and an equity lens. It is in this work of equity and parent leadership that our next speaker has dedicated her career. Donna Thompson Bennett is the Executive Director of the National Parent Leadership Institute. As a parent leader and retired attorney, she has 30 years in advocacy experience, with 25 of those years centered on parent leadership and civic engagement. Donna considers herself a global citizen who is passionate and committed to social justice and race equity. A highlight of her leadership is facilitating across difference with parent, community, and civic leaders to build partnerships that yield positive outcomes for families and communities. Prior to becoming executive director, Donna worked within the organization for over a decade as a national consultant and implementation specialist, and has partnered in implementing Parent Leadership Training Institute sites across the country. She also served as the coordinator of Bridgeport Public Schools Parent Center and her local Parent Leadership Training Institute. Donna's professional journey has always included elements of civics, as a former New York County Assistant District Attorney to engaging parents to be change agents and advocates for their children. Donna graduated with a BA in political science from Spelman College and holds a JD from Georgetown University Law Center. Donna's current parent and community engagement includes roles in Bridgeport Prosper's Cradle to Career Initiative and Connecticut Department of Education Commissioners Roundtable on Family and Community Engagement, among many others. She's also an active member of her beloved church family, Mount Airy Baptist Church, and public service sorority, Delta Sigma Theta. Donna and her husband, Anthony, live and love in Bridgeport, Connecticut with their son and granddaughter. I am so grateful that Donna has agreed to join with us today to share her experience, pass along tools of the trade, and of course, lift up families. Donna, welcome.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Anne, for getting us started this morning. I'm going to ask Taylor to begin my slides. Good morning, beautiful people who have joined us this morning. Before we begin any presentation, it is our practice at MPLI to acknowledge the land of the Indigenous people where we find ourselves. As the United Way of Central Indiana is our host for this summit, I acknowledge the Indigenous communities of this region, including the Mumwaki, the Lenape, the Bodewamik, and the Sawanwa people, as past, present, and future caretakers of this land, and encourage you to do the same, as well as in the future engage with these communities to learn more of their history and how you might support reparative work to promote a more equitable community with them. I also pause in gratitude to thank Whitney Fields and that entire team who has planned this summit event. And I join with you as a partner, at least for this morning, in 2 generations, 1 future. I also want to say thank you for the taste of Indiana. I look forward to the day when we can actually again gather in person and we can travel beyond our borders to actually interface one-on-one or in small communities or in large gatherings as we get better as a nation. I will share the gift box with my family, I promise. I will not keep all the goodies to myself. Before I get into why we are here and why I am with you this morning, I also need to pause and say thank you to Taylor Rhodes for being my backbone technical support this morning. You guys can't see Taylor, but she is there. And so making it possible for you to see me and to hear me and all of the speakers in this particular room. This morning, as we explore promoting parent voice and equity, I invite you to think of your parents or family members, ancestors perhaps, who inspire or guide you in life in the 2Gen work with parents and children. Take a moment to reflect on yourself as a member of a family, no matter the size, no matter the structure, and think about those particular family members or caring adults in your life that inspire and guide you even today. Feel free to speak their names in your heart space. In the work of parent voice and leadership, and particularly in equity, we often, as we're working with partners as organizations, remind them to remember they too are part of family. Most often, they have some other role. It might be parent, some might have elevated to the role of grandparent, might be aunt, you might be uncle. Whatever it is, your role matters. My parents, who I always bring with me, taught me the importance of their voice and influence and encouraged me to use my voice as a leader for good with my family, friends, and community. And that is why I actually went on the pathway to become an attorney. My mother shared with me that you need to be an attorney. I must confess, I thought I would be a teacher. Honestly, I thought maybe first a nurse, but then I realized I didn't like blood and the other things that go with that. But the teaching piece, I really, really loved. I love learning and I love being able to share lessons with others. But my mother, in her most amazing, kind and loving way, said, "You are mouth almighty, tongue everlasting, always advocating for something or someone. You really need to get the official training to do that." And even though I thought I would be a teacher, because of her parent voice that resonated in my spirit and took, its own like blossoming, nurturing, growing concept, I actually believed that not only should I be, but that I could be an attorney. And for a season, I was. And I always found a way, though, to get back to something connected to teaching and learning. Never officially in a K through 12 or early childhood classroom, but somehow always connected to parents and children. It is the lessons of both my mom and dad that still guide me as a parent leader in my work with other parents and child leaders today and with partners. And one of the key lessons that they shared was always know your or other people's why. Why are they doing a particular thing? Taylor, if you could move to the next slide. So who or what is your why for engaging in 2Gen work? Who or what matters to you that inspires you to do this whole family work that Ascend at the Aspen Institute notes builds family well-being by intentionally and simultaneously working with children and adults in their lives together? Who or what motivates you to raise and or promote parent voice and equity as key components of this work? Take a moment and think about your why. And then I invite all of you, or as many who would like, to place your response to your why in the chat in order that we might bring your voice into the room. What is your why? Sherry says to help build communities in future generations. My why from Whitney is my community and our whole connectiveness. My daughter, Kennedy. Patsy says, I'm a strong believer in family. Siobhan says, growing up in Harlem, I learned firsthand how to survive and be resourceful. Whatever your why is, let that be the motivation beyond our time here this morning as you continue to do the work beyond this summit. Anna, let's bring Anna's back if possible, Taylor. People surrounded me when I needed it as a parent. I want to offer the support and love I felt to parents who need that too. Thank you, Anna. All your voices matter. I may be the main voice speaking right now, but your voices are what will carry forth the actual message and the work around the value of parent voice and equity. My personal why includes my teenage son, Ahmad, and my 4-year-old granddaughter, Nyla, who my husband and I are raising. And it extends to all the children of our community, our nation, and world who I believe deserve equitable and high quality living and learning environments and experiences where they can thrive and not be limited by their race, gender, income, language, or any other difference that they identify with or others perceive. Now let us begin to explore our organizational whys or missions for the work. I can't tell you all of your whys, but I lift up the United Way of Central Indiana's mission that states that at its core, United Way is a community impact organization powered by a wide network of supporters just like you. Together with local partners, we work to make Central Indiana a place where every child, person, and family has the opportunity to thrive and reach their full potential. This organizational why aligns with my personal and my organizational why. And based on the whys that were shared, I believe that is the same for some of you. As we move forward in understanding the importance of promoting parent voice and equity as core components of your 2Gen work, I will share some of the who, why, how of NPLI and what happens as a result of us striving to live out our why as an organization. Next slide, please. NPLI is a nonpartisan, parent-centered, and anti-racist organization that partners with parents and other community leaders to increase racial equity in policy and practice, advance a healthy democracy, and improve child outcomes through the civic engagement of families. Racial equity is both a value and a verb for us at the National Parent Leadership Institute. In our work, we operate with respect, inclusivity, integrity, kindness, and innovation to create partnership, equity, and growth. At the National Parent Leadership Institute, we have been bringing parent leaders together across difference for over 30 years via our Parent Leadership Training Institute that was started by the Connecticut Commission on Children via Parent Voice. As a result of then the executive director, Elaine Zimmerman, our board chair of NPLI, and the founder of this curriculum, listening to the voices of parents as they talked about what they knew and understood their children needed to be ready for school. This school readiness initiative moved forward into great ideas from these parents of what could be done, and then got to the place where how do we bring these ideas before the civic bodies who are making policy and practice decisions for this work to take place? When Elaine asked and probed the question, those same parents who had generated these amazing ideas paused. It didn't matter which community she was in. It didn't matter whether it was urban or suburban or a rural environment like agriculture of Connecticut. The race and culture and gender diversity was widespread, but there was a refrain that went from community to community when she asked that question about, so what do we present, and how do you get your agenda before the legislative bodies? There would be a pause, and a parent in the room would say something like, "But I'm just a parent." And because Elaine was practicing the leadership skill of active listening, she knew after hearing that a number of times that she needed to learn more. So one of the first things I share with you as you continue the work, some of you may just be starting. Some of you may be trying to figure out where you begin to invite parent voice. The first thing I would encourage you to do is, if you invite it first to listen and learn. Because in doing that, PLTI was born. And the National Parent Leadership Institute, with local and state partners and communities, coordinates and increases the civic skills and impact of diverse parent and child leaders to inform democracy as leading advocates for children in their homes, at school, and in community by implementing this PLTI curriculum throughout the nation. It started here in Connecticut, but has expanded now to about 69 communities. Our recruitment and engagement of parent leaders was and is designed to create an inclusive environment of diverse identities and thoughts based on the demographics of community. From the beginning, diversity was a core tenet and inclusion was a key strategy to implement and embed parent leadership and voice in civic policy and practice as vehicle for system change. It was this same parent leadership and voice that created the initial curriculum that I will say to you started as about 12 weeks. And after those first graduates went through the initiative in Hartford, they said, "This was great, but we want more. We also want to be able to build our civic toolkit to understand this, that, and these other items." And because of that, the 20-week civic initiative, and it's a family civic initiative, it's not a program because there's movement and growth and always opportunity for things to be updated, enhanced, and improved upon because of the parent voice that informs the curriculum throughout each journey. Every time parent leaders go on the journey in their community, they have the opportunity to not only participate in a pre and post survey about the impact of the curriculum, but also throughout the journey, each session, they get to give their feedback on what they think of the session in terms of the content as well as the process, and if there are changes that they would like to recommend we consider in the implementation. And what's really great about that is just yesterday, I was listening to a parent leader out of Rochester, New York. Ricardo Adams talked about how responsive the site of Greater Rochester PLTI was to each of those parent leaders and their children who were journeying with them through the CLTI experience, the Children's Leadership Training Institute, that I'll talk more about in a moment, that when they actually put down their thoughts, that those thoughts were highlighted at the very next session. If there was a change that needed to be made from something as simple as what was for dinner, it happened. Unless, of course, it was out of budget, and then it was explained that that couldn't occur. But what's important here is to know that if you are inviting parent voice, you want to be able to listen and respond accordingly. You never want to invite voice just for the sake of having a checklist that said you gave parents an opportunity to share. We have found that when we have actually allowed their leadership and voice to guide us, it actually led us to being better, to being more in sync, and reaching really the ultimate mission and our value that is explained in our statement that I just shared at the beginning on the slide. This parent voice through PLTI alumni has led us as MPLI to directly address the elephant in the room, that is racial equity, and shape the value statement on this slide. We know the power of parents, united around advancing outcomes for the next generation. We know the power of building communities that are truly diverse. We know the power of sharing ourselves deeply and facing bias and stereotypes head on. We know the power of civics in addressing racial equity. We know the power of civics in addressing, I'm repeating that, I apologize, in addressing racial equity. And we partner with parents as they take that power firmly in their hands. Partnership is also key to parent voice. If you invite parents to the table, you want to make sure that you're inviting them as peer decision makers and thought partners with you, not to be there again as a token representative to just check off that they are there at your table. You really want them to be able to inform the decisions that you are making around what are the whole family approaches that you wish to continue or embark upon through your organizational work and community. Next slide. We too recognized with PLTI that we were in a position to do this as a two-generational model. I'm sorry, yeah, okay, next slide, thank you. And PLTI is two-generational in that it recognizes that multiple generations raise children and that communities offer leadership trainings to parents and grandparents through PLTI. Children get to participate in a parallel curriculum while parents are in class through CLTI. This parent-child participation and leadership enhances children's vision of their own potential to affect change. In PLTI, we all have another refrain. We've changed the refrain of, but I'm just a parent, to I'm a parent leader. But we also recognize that alongside parents, that there are young people, their very children, and children in a community who also have the ability to lead, even as young people, and that we shouldn't miss the opportunity, we shouldn't ignore it. And then we recognize that there's a role that we have in that we are to be allies with them in the two-gen approach with our child leaders. Next slide. As we engage children as young leaders, we must remember as caring adults, and this is whether you're the caring adult as their parent or a caring adult who works with them, we encourage you to be an ally. And allies create opportunities of access, literacy, leadership, interaction, and inclusion with and for them to thrive in equitable environments and experiences. We understand that our CLTI, our Children's Leadership Training Institute, is an organic bridge to parent leadership, and that it joins the children and their parents together to end up investing in what they want to do differently to lead within their very home, in their schools, and in the greater community. We encourage you as you consider the initiatives, whether they are child-focused or adult parent-focused, are they leadership-focused? Does it acknowledge the ability for children and their parents to help lead the work to create well-being for their lives and for those within their community? Our work within PLTI and CLTI has clearly indicated that that is true. I'll share some results and outcomes a little later, and also know that there are handouts that are available to you that highlight more of this work that we won't have time to actually discuss. Next slide. So as you consider how your organization promotes parent voice and equity, I offer this frame of diversity, inclusion, and equity to ground our shared understanding just for today. You might have your own definitions of diversity and inclusion and equity, and that is perfectly all right. But in order for us to just be on the same page today, I thought I'd share this slide from the Lone Star College, and also it's informed by Race Matters that we have used in our racial equity work as NPLI. Oftentimes, the acronyms for this work is DEI, diversity, existence of individual and social differences that contribute to identity. And then it goes to equity. But if you notice on the slide, That's not how it's framed. I believe that is an intentional positive but misordered expression of this work. If ordered in the steps that are needed to build and reach the goal of equity, inclusion must happen after or with diversity. That acronym, however, would be DIE, which is not a life-giving phrase. I do, however, suggest that as you examine how your organization is promoting parent voice through a DEI lens, that you consider, are there some policies, practices, or programs that need to cease to exist because they do not live out the principles of diversity, inclusion, or equity? Inclusion speaks to that intentionality that Anne talked about, intentionally fostering an environment in which each individual is valued and respected for their diversity, empowered to engage and contribute, and is provided access to resources and opportunities. And for us at MPLI, empowered does not mean a giving of power. It is a tapping into the power that is within that for whatever reason has either been unconsciously or consciously suppressed because of how one has been marginalized as a parent, and particularly if it's Black, Indigenous, or other people of color in our communities. Equity, grounded in the principles of fairness, equity makes diversity and inclusion central to establishing policies and practices, creating opportunities, and ensuring each individual has the tools and support they need to achieve their individual success. I share with you, as you think about equity, think about the individual. Yes, it's collective work that we're seeking to do. It's whole family work. But even as you have a whole family approach, it's based on each individual. And particularly when we're talking about children, if they're multi-age children, the needs of those children will vary. And if we are trying to make sure that each child has the opportunity to thrive and to have a life of well-being, then we need to meet their needs and offer the appropriate tools and support in order for them to achieve their success. Now, I will share with you that this is hard work. And at times it's uncomfortable work. Your equity might not always be about race, but whatever the inequities you are seeking to address, it means actually saying that something that one group gets, others do not, and that there's some form of privilege that has been exercised systemically that causes the inequities. And because of that, those who might experience the privilege might feel uncomfortable in having the conversation with those who don't usually get the privilege and don't have the access, in fact, have the obstacles and barriers in place that make it very difficult to access the same wonderful experiences that others have in order that they can have a life where they are able to thrive in living and learning. But even though it's hard work, I believe that because of your partnership with the United Way of Central Indiana and Ascend, you have decided it is important and necessary work. Some of you have already started the work. And I invite you at any point in the chat to share how you are moving along this continuum of diversity, inclusion, and equity. But some of you may be asking where we begin to do this work. Well, because I believe that when you're in the virtual space, that is important to incorporate a break when you've been going for 30 minutes or more. We'll get back to sharing some of those beginning steps after we share a movement stretch break. You don't have to leave. In fact, I'm going to still be here, but I'm going to ask Taylor to advance the next slide. Alexa, play. Alexa, play last song. I'm going to put on some music for us. I'm hoping you can hear it. And I invite you to join me in just kind of stretching and moving. If you need to step away and take care of yourself, feel free to do that in these next few minutes. But it's important, and the reason why I'm including a stretch break is not just because I know we need it after you've been on a screen for a period of time. And I even encourage you, if you want to either take yourself off camera for a little bit or take yourself off view so that you can rest your eyes and enjoy the music just for a moment, but also just as a reminder that as we do this work, we lean into, we stretch beyond the discomfort, because we know that on the other side of it is the goal that we seek. And that is to be able to ensure or encourage, build, and promote with parents and families a more equitable society. Stretch it out. One more. And Taylor, I invite you to advance to the slide that is the one we had before, but just advance it. Again, yes, I did the stretch break with you, but I always encourage, and we encourage at MPLI, that as we do the work with parents and child leaders, that again, we promote self-care with them, and we do it also by making sure we take care of ourselves. So at some point, you might see me take a sip of water, but know that I'm not going to leave you. So as we return to diversity, inclusion, and equity, about how you begin to move along this continuum, I would say first that you start, or if you've already started, continue inviting diverse parent voice to inform your efforts to create inclusive organizational environments where every individual, including parents and children, are valued, respected for their diversity, and engaged as contributing partners in the whole family approach, and given access to resources and opportunities. Know that this is an ongoing process. It's not just a one and done. And it is the foundation strategy for creating and implementing opportunities, policies, and practices for equity long term. Equity is grounded in fairness, not equality. People often ask, well, if everyone gets the same thing, isn't that equity? No, because equity recognizes that everyone's journey toward success doesn't start from the same level playing field. And because of that, the navigation tools and supports for success should be based upon the needs of the individual. And we only know that by hearing from the individual parents and children. And if the children are young, their parents who lead for and with them and represent their voice until their own voice is formed. We at MPLI believe a community's well-being depends critically upon its residents' active engagement in civic life. In particular, parents possess critical knowledge of children's needs and special insights on the resources needed to solve community problems. Examine your current practices, and if necessary, redesign them with a DEI lens that promotes the well-being of families through parent voice. As you think about what your current practice is, as you are already engaged in whole family approaches, I invite you to share in the chat, what are some of the ways that you are including parent voice as a way to move towards equity in your organization? It could be something that you're already doing, or it could be something that you're considering doing. I pause to give you time to reflect. Based on this slide, what are some things that your organization is doing to build diversity, inclusion, and equity? Lauren says, hiring practices, staff training and community building, centering our work and impact, evaluation around participant voice, and tracking towards their self-determined goals. One of my favorite principles of Kwanzaa is Kuchichakalia, the self-determination concept of being able to name and speak for oneself. And so, Lauren, that is so important in this work. The voice matters of the individual and what they believe should happen in order for things to be more inclusive and more equitable. Thank you. Is there anyone else? Allison shares, we began a DEI committee and we've created an equity fund named after a wonderful woman in the Lafayette community, Sarah Rounds Price. It is created to allow funding to equitable programs. Allison raises a great point. This costs. To do the work of diversity and inclusion towards equity, there's some investment that you need to make. And so it's great to hear that Allison and her organization is doing that. One of the things that because we're on the journey, so let me be very clear, as NPLI, we haven't arrived. We're on the journey too. It's an ongoing journey. It's not a destination. And what we recognize in all of our diversity work and all of our efforts of inclusion and bringing parents together across all forms of difference, race, culture, language, social economics, that though we brought people together across language, we didn't promote the ability to share and speak from their language, their first language, or their language of comfort or preference. And so for the last few years, we've been very committed to a concept of language justice. If you noticed on some of my slides, there was in English as well as in Spanish, because the predominant group of parent leaders that we work with and community leaders, we have been requested to have Spanish as the other language for people. And the way we do it is simultaneous so that everyone is hearing their language, a preference. So it's not parent leaders when we were in person, it's not like someone pushed over at a table in a corner with an interpreter and others in another space and at the front of the room. Everyone is wherever they want to be in the room, and they're wearing headsets and they're hearing their language that they understand. Whether it's English or Spanish, or if we were in Miami, Haitian Creole also was provided. Zoom has provided us another gift where the Zoom setup allows for simultaneous interpretation. You, of course, still need to have people who can bring the language justice. And we've been fortunate to work with a group out of New Orleans, Banca Lenguas, where they are able to have English or Spanish going at the same time, depending on what the need is. So when we recently invited parent voice into our parent policy table and a series of Dear Mr. Presidents, creating an open letter to President Biden, we were able to have an event that was first hosted in English with Spanish simultaneous interpretation, and then another event that was hosted in Spanish with English simultaneous interpretation, and then a third event that was also in English with Spanish interpretation. And so we were able to bring the gift of language, but that was an investment. I will say, you pay to have that additional piece, but if you are seeking to really have inclusion in a way to ground equity, that is a practice I would encourage you to consider. Are there any other practices that this community would like to share before we move forward? Meredith says, we've now added questions to our parent survey about diversity, equity, and inclusion and their experiences surrounding these topics. Meredith, that's amazing. When I talk about PLTI, the Parent Leadership Training Institute, from the beginning, diversity was a part of it in an effort to get at inclusion. And so we actually ask parents as they are filling out a one-page, friendly application, what is your experience with working with people from different backgrounds? Because we know that we want each class to be made up of people from various backgrounds, bringing their diverse thoughts into the conversation and all being valued. So that's really great that you are doing it from the beginning and learning from parent leaders. Anyone else? Carlina Moses says, giving parents a voice and opportunity to share their culture and traditions so that we can incorporate, it went away, diversity into the classrooms. There are a lot of communities, because of the push from parents and children, are changing even the curriculum in schools. And in order for it to be more inclusive and to tell the whole story, particularly from a historical concept, as we started with the Indigenous land acknowledgement, but to be able to tell the story of the Indigenous people, and that is still rich, and to be able to share the story of those of African descent who were involuntarily brought here and forced into enslavement, but helped really to build the very nation in terms of not only the physical structure, but the capitalistic infrastructure that exists today because of the free labor of Black and Brown people. To be able to incorporate the Asian American story in terms of the immigration story, and then all immigrants that came from different countries that now make this nation the diverse nation that it is. Their individual contributions as well as their collective contributions, and to be able to share it in a way that is from the lens, of diversity and inclusion and truth. Not a partial story, but a whole story. Someone else. Tara, being intentional about including more voices and creating conditions, social and physical, in which folks feel comfortable to participate. Parks, neighborhoods, spaces, community centers, places they are already going. The inclusion is about all forms of difference and different abilities, and being able to have the equity concept would be, and some people would say it even moves towards and bends towards the arc of justice, that your access of inclusion should make sure that no matter if someone needs some form of actual physical, whether it's a wheelchair, a ramp, some type of device to help them, whether it's speaking or hearing, some form of interpretation to be provided. That's another way of moving towards an inclusive and equity grounded work. Is there one more? Donna, we have a DEI committee and have developed DEI specialist role to participate in hiring. One of the things that there's work that is done around, if you're particularly interested in diversity and inclusion and equity through a racial equity lens, but I think there are racial equity practices that can go into other domains of equity, but particularly if that's your interest, the hiring specialist piece that Donna just shared, they talk about having in your workforce, not only people who are responsible for making sure that your actual workforce reflects the diversity and seeks to be an inclusive environment, but it's a diversity from the standpoint of real authentic cultural voice and not shrinking. Now, people are allowed to be their authentic selves based on how they identify, but that's really important. And so a DEI specialist helps to promote that. It also talks about that you as an organization want to have someone, if they're your specialist, who's your champion. So it's not just for those newly hired, but it's for those people who are already there, who are part of the organizational environment, who are joining in partnership to move equity in the community as well as the internal community of your organization. Everyone needs to be on board with shared definitions. I encourage you, if you haven't already, to take a look at, there's an article from Awake to Woke that really gives you some starting points And they're not only starting points to me because they're ongoing. This is an ongoing journey. Wherever you find yourself, there might be 5 points there. You might be doing 1 or 2 of them already and could enhance it by adding the other pieces. But it is a good way to say, how do I begin to do this? We talk about the elephant in the room and we say, how do you eat an elephant? And we recognize it's 1 bite at a time. And so you might not be able to snap your finger or hit a switch and everything is DEI ready at your organization because you want it to be or you believe it important enough. There's hard work and work that you will have to do to get there. Thank you for sharing. And again, I encourage you, and you will have other examples that will be shared with you throughout the summit today. But make sure you share with each other, because the one thing that we also believe is that we learn from and with one another, that we don't want to hold on to anything that could be a resource of information to another organization joining in the quest for equity. And particularly for us, it is the lens of racial equity. I want to share, before I move to the last set of slides, remember that this is an ongoing journey and that we hope to travel beyond equity to arrive at a place of justice, where I think Anne talked about the very barriers and obstacles and imposed limitations that require navigation strategies, that they're actually removed so that individual success is not barred, that they have the opportunity to engage in inclusive access and to have opportunity that all have and should have. That is when justice is there, a little further beyond equity. And so I hope that as you continue to work within your organization, that you also know that you want to always go towards equity, but with the long goal being so that the very barriers that call for us to do this equity work and the barriers that are systemic, that they are moved, and the systemic systems of racism and any other inequity practice are actually removed. In these last slides, I will share some of the visual and literal outcomes of our 2-gen civic leadership approach via PLTI and CLTI. I would love to, bring the voices of parent leaders with me. I'm not that tech savvy and couldn't figure out how to make sure that I could stay on screen, pause out, and also bring video voice, but I do have visuals. And so I'm going to ask Taylor to advance to the next slide. And what you see is a beautiful picture of Miriam Aziz under a painting that talks about be kind. And then you see all of these adults with a book called Soulful Sydney Explores Diversity. Well, Miriam Aziz, the young lady who was about 10 or 11 I think at the time, is the author or co-author. She joined with some caring adult to actually write and publish this book. It is now a part of the CLTI curriculum because CLTI, it is a child's leadership initiative that's literacy based. And so each week that children participate, they get an actual book that is age and grade appropriate, that grounds the lesson of democracy and civics for the week. So there's a whole class around thriving with diversity. So now Soulful Sydney is one of the books that is shared. And imagine the joy of CLTI teachers across our nation being able to share with fellow CLTI students, current CLTI students, this book is from someone who actually was a child who's now who's a teenager, who wrote this book. She did this. She utilized her voice. Miriam is changing the aspects of how people view her and other young, beautiful, brilliant Muslim young ladies. She wrote the book and was inspired because she was bullied because of her difference. And she realized that part of the bullying was because people didn't understand. They didn't get the beauty of difference and how it was a real asset in community. And so her unfortunate experience moved her in finding her voice as a child leader to change the narrative by encouraging even the very school where she had the negative experience to do things differently. You see that these different adults who have it are parent leaders in different venues, parent partner leaders, and we make sure that we promote this and share it. And I think you can find it on Amazon. And we can get that information. We will definitely follow that up with Whitney for the future. But I just want you to understand, when people talk about whole family approach, the child focus can have a leadership tenet and actually yield incredible outcomes. That's just one. There are other child authors who have advanced through the PLTI, CLTI shared experience. Next slide. This visual is from Rochester with a child leader speaking at her graduation, their graduation. And I also wanted to put this here because it's just one picture of how children become comfortable, but taking the mic and sharing their vision of what they believe can happen in their community in order for things to be designed in a way that promotes their well-being and the well-being of all children, and through the lens of diversity. CLTI, as part of PLTI, really does embrace the whole family. And it's a form of high quality childcare. Some of you are in the business of early learning and care. And we've learned some of the amazing lessons from early childcare to actually implement. Like I said, it's literacy based. It's based on Gardner's and theories of multiple intelligence, where we understand that children all bring something and a learning ability and a learning style to the experience. And we tap into their intelligence and we believe that they can have all of them, but there are some that have stronger strengths in different areas. And so the curriculum is designed for there to be analytical and musical moments and movement moments. And it's hands-on. There's a foundation that's built around civics, but through the lens of children, through age and grade appropriate stories. And it's intergenerational because it's designed for 3 to 12-year-olds, but we have found that a lot of communities also want the teenagers to be able to come and experience this. And so they are there also sharing as peer leaders and being able to maybe be that volunteer reader of the story that grounds the evening with the younger children, and to be a part of the leadership team with the teachers and facilitating the activities that promote leadership in civics and democracy in a way that children can embrace and then engage. Next slide, please. This slide goes back to the parents. And I particularly chose a segment of a report that you will get, that you will have in your handouts around parent leadership in education, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I want to highlight these 4 examples. They're from different areas of our nation. Don't have Indiana yet, so hopefully Indiana might consider if PLTI is something you guys would want to implement in your corner of the nation. But in the meantime, be inspired in whatever whole family approach you're doing by people like this parent leader out of Merced, California. In Delhi, Maria noted that public library spaces for children to access computers and homework help were only open 2 days a week for limited hours. For children without access to technology and internet, this provided a significant challenge for their learning. She successfully advocated to keep libraries open throughout the week with expanded hours. In Rochester, New York, after white supremacist flyers were dropped in their community, Manish and other parent leaders launched CURB, Community Uprooting Racism in Brighton. CURB, over the course of 4+ years, resulted in the establishment of Parents of Color Group in the district, the establishment of Ongoing Inclusion, Diversity, Equity Board, and the town in partnering with the school district to launch data inquiries around discipline across racial, subgroups, and cultural responsiveness considerations for curriculum revisions. A parent leader engaged other parents and community members to address this issue and to then bring about something that not only addressed the immediate issue of the flyers, but move forward so that there's an established practice of inclusion, diversity, and there's a board that drives towards equity in this community. And Everett, Washington, realizing that her school district was not yet able to implement the since time immemorial about tribal sovereignty in Washington state curriculum, Brenda successfully advocated for professional development for the Edmond School District staff on teaching this important culturally responsive curriculum. So many times we might look to our leaders, whether it is state leaders, local leaders, or national leaders. But one of the things that PLTI teaches that sometimes the parent leaders are the ones that the community has been waiting for to lead the change, to make the difference. And sometimes the change has to be incremental. Doesn't mean that you still don't go for the statewide work. But if you believe that the time is now and that there's a way to act now, Brenda demonstrates that in moving forward with the since time immemorial tribal sovereignty in the state of Washington. And finally, in Jacksonville, Florida, recognizing that implicit bias is an essential foundation step to addressing racism and equity concerns, and seeing a need for this work in her district, Whitney successfully fundraised and advocated for teacher training and certification for a train-the-trainer model in her district, providing resources to certify a district trainer, as well as to continue offering this important training to educators each year. This has become embedded in Jacksonville in the Duval County School District. They offer this implicit bias training and build upon racial equity training with their teaching, as well as other members of the education team throughout the district. This even occurred in the midst of the pandemic with a virtual series of summits around it where the community were able to participate with the education community to be a part of these ongoing trainings. This is something that now is such a part of the fabric of Duval County Schools that every teacher who comes in to the district will be trained to recognize if they possess, and we all often do without even being conscious and sometimes consciously, bias. And so they seek to unpack it in a way to move towards racial justice. Next slide, please. I'm not moving as quickly. The two-generation approach, again, here are examples of outcomes of CLTI. And we refer to it as growing civic leaders because young people are still growing, but yet in the midst of their journey, they are already leading. The examples you see here, you will also see in a report in one of the handouts that a CLTI graduate, Sarah, as an 8th grader, presented at a State of the Students address, organizing a group of peers and traveling with them to her state capital to advocate for fair funding for her school district. So let me make sure I state that correctly. Sarah actually organized this State of the Students address. She created it and she engaged other students to go with her to the state capitol to present this. And she moved the needle, and Sarah's still advocating. Frances, another CLTI graduate, spoke at a national education conference, The Big Bang, while in 4th grade to push education to better understand the needs of young people and the capacities they have for leadership. Jack, while a current CLTI student, spoke to his district Board of Education on the importance of reducing styrofoam in school cafeterias. Believe that's Jack below pictured. We really believe that the impact of the two-generational model has with families should not be understated. Seeing a parent utilize the lessons of leadership, community, and reflection that they are receiving in their CLTI classroom reinforces the lessons in a powerful way for children. As results, parents and children discuss the ideas and information they encounter, whether they're on the bus, in a car, in their living room, down in the Zoom space, or on their way home from class if it's in person, and later in the week at the family dinner table, and maybe after they've shared the children's book of the week. They actually begin to practice together and grow together. And the lessons of civics and community take root in their home and extend out into the community. We encourage the lessons that you've learned from parents and from child leaders. Like Anne began to tell those stories, and you will hear stories later throughout the day. It is those stories that really are the qualitative data that support the quantitative research and outcomes that we have, and you could go to our website and see. But it is the stories of change. It is the stories of well-being. It is the story of pushing towards inclusion and equity that really resonate and show, and demonstrate the ultimate value of including parent and child voice in all of your efforts for equity. Next slide, please. The final project that I will hold up is the Laundromat Library Project. And I wanted to do this last because wherever you are doing the work, I believe that you are doing it in and hopefully with community partners, and that these partners don't have to be just the traditional service leader partners, but they could be civic leaders, but they could be also businesses such as your local laundromats. That's what Grace did. She partnered with a laundromat. She cared about closing the literacy gap, especially between the children between the ages of 0 to 5, because the data and the stats indicated that in her community of Chelsea, Mass, that they were lagging behind in her neighboring communities. Literacy is an indicator of future success, and through her project, everyone who uses laundromats will be able to help close that gap. So Grace of Revere, Mass set up, you can see, the little laundromat bookshelves where people could come while laundry was being done and borrow books to read them right there, possibly take them with them, maybe had people come and give books to it. So it's an ongoing cycle of give and take resource around literacy in her community. I didn't think of that. Grace, a parent leader, who, because she had the opportunity to participate in PLTI that has a 2-gen approach to it, she thought about the children of her community where there was a gap. And she said, what can I do to help close that gap? Remember Grace and all of the parent leaders and children's leader stories that I've shared here today. But even if you don't, remember as well as create in partnership your own stories that tell the story of how a whole family approach must be done through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and incorporate the power of parent voice. I will pause at this time to take questions. Oh, you see pictures, but so as I'm getting ready to take questions, there's some pictures there where you see other CLTI and PLTI leaders speaking in the different issues that they're speaking on. One of the things I love to share that our PLTI communities literally go from Maine to Hawaii, and we are international in that we have a partnership in Brisbane, Australia. So I invite questions, comments, thoughts from the chat. And Taylor will put those up for me. as you think about questions, the one thing I didn't get to have as a slide because it was fresh off the press yesterday, but is included in your handouts, is the Dear Mr. President open letter to President Joseph R. Biden. We as MPLI convened a series of parent leadership voice tables, our parent policy tables, where we heard and learned from parent leaders. They shared their policy agenda that they thought the new administration should be considering beyond the 100 days of this new administration. And those three tables generated a number of different policy concerns that are being shared with the president, but also being promoted as an open letter. So the handout that you have makes space for you if you'd like. There's a vehicle for you to sign on to the letter. We hope that you would promote it and share it with your network of parent and family leaders in order that they realize that parent voice is going forward, reflecting some of the different values around policy concerns and issues that, one, we believe the administration in some ways has started to address, but we wanted them to know the particular concerns that parents have. Whitney is asking my why and what keeps you engaged in the work. So earlier, Whitney, I was able to share, and sometimes I have a picture, but I don't now. But my why is in the form of a teenage son, Ahmad, who learns differently, and my granddaughter, who my husband and I are now raising since the sudden passing of her mom from an aneurysm at 30, Nyla, who is 4. And she will soon be 5, but depending on what day it is, she might be 55, or she might want to go back to being 3 because she thinks that 5 is just so old and she has to be a big girl. But they're my why, because I want them, like the children of my community and really throughout the nation, and I said throughout the globe, to be able to experience life in a way that really promotes their well-being. I want them to experience and be able to live life that includes joy, and that they don't have to live a life of fear or limitation because of who they are and how they identify. So my why is them, as well as I'm motivated to continue to be engaged in this work because I was blessed with some amazing parent leaders. Before the term was used, I carry the lessons of both my mom, Hazel, and my dad, Bill, with me. They may be on the other side of this thing called life, but they are always in my heart and mind with the valuable lessons that guide me around the value of them as advocates and for me and my siblings to be able to experience things that other people did not get to experience, that they had to fight for, and some died for in order that I and my generation would have access to certain rights around democracy. And Annie asks, are there ways to get trained in PLTI and CLTI or access to resources and ways to use that approach? Yes, we do a national training. And this year, of course, it's virtually, but we do the training and offer the training in partnership with communities because we are usually invited into communities. It's when communities say, you know what, I want to try this approach. I want to engage because I believe our parents, leaders want a course in family civics and democracy. And so there are pieces that are built even before training is done. And so I think our information, yes, in terms of Parents Who Lead is there. You can go to our website, but you can also, there's an information email that you could ask for information about PLTI and CLTI to gain information about those two initiatives and how they work together. They're not offered separate and apart from one another. It is it is a dual 2-gen approach. It's not child focused over here and parent focused over there. It is done together. And also we can give you the information of how you can begin to build what we call a civic design team that is reflective of the diversity and demographics of your community to begin to build this initiative in your community. Do you define parent at the beginning of the program? We in the epicenter of the opioid epidemic and have found that we need to find new words to describe the adults who are raising children, especially when communicating with the kids. For many, mom and dad are words they can't use anymore. Rachel, great question. We have a broad definition of parent. Parent might be mom or dad, and we acknowledge that. It might be another family member, or a grandmother or an auntie or an uncle. or it might be another caring, loving community member, a family, whether it's through, we know we have children who might be in families who might be foster children. And so they are part of a family structure that does not include their biological parents, either for a season, and sometimes it's a long journey. But so we definitely define parent broadly. And we have even had those who care for children and their well-being. And they have been teachers who don't have their own children, who have invested in the PLTI journey as well. Other questions? I want to thank you for the time that you've allowed me to come before you. I hope that it inspired you in the work that you're already doing to build the 2-gen whole family approach within your partnerships. And I would be grateful if there was something that you received from me as a gift that you didn't have before. But I want you to know I am grateful for the gift of sharing in this experience with United Way of Central Indiana and all of you. Unfortunately, my schedule won't allow me to join in some of the great sessions throughout the day, but know that I'm cheering all of the storytellers, the presenters, the workshop facilitators on as you do the work. Allison asked a great question. What is the best way to meet parents where they're at? I think that there's 2 ways I want to answer that. From a physical standpoint, reach them where they are, right? We believe in PLTI that you meet them where they are. So if you even look at the project that Grace did, you think about where do you find parents literally in the community? And you want to be able to promote some of your initiatives in those places. It might not be just your community center or the school or the library, though those are great places. It might be faith-based organizations, and I would encourage that. It also might be the beauty parlor, the barbershop, because there are places where people and parents gather, and they have these informal places where democracy and civics take place in terms of conversation. So meet them there. So that's the physical piece of it. And in this Zoom thing, of course, you do everything that you can in terms of, if you have parents that have signed into your work, then you stay engaged with them. You find the best way to communicate with them, whether it's through email, text. It might even be the old-fashioned thing of a phone call. Whatever it is, you do that. But then in terms of meeting them where they are, a couple of years ago, I believe, at an Ascend Aspen Institute Summit in DC, Janine McMahon, a parent leader out of our Hartford area, was participating as a panelist. And she shared how in PLTI, we believe that you meet parents where they are and then inspire them to where they want to go on the journey and leadership. But Janine said, I found that not only do you meet parents where they are, you meet parents where they dream. What they dream for their families, what they desire and wish for and hope for and work for their children. And then you seek to give them the supports, the resources, and the access that help make those dreams possible. I hope that answers your question, Allison. And I will say that wherever they are, wherever you find parents, tap into their leadership. It's there, even if they don't fully believe it at the time. There are mechanisms and stories and questions that you will ask that will reveal to you and sometimes even to them for the first time, because they never thought about it through the lens of leadership and parent voice, that they are an advocate, that they are a champion and have been for their children. Encourage that in the work. Again, thank you. I believe we are almost at time. And so I offer you, if there are no more questions, the gift of time so that you have a break in between your next session and enjoy the rest of the day. I look forward to hearing from some of you, but know that the resources that you have are there for you to share with others and to utilize in any way in your work. And I hope that it is helpful. Have a great day. Thank you, Whitney. Thank you, Taylor, and the whole team at the United Way of Central Indiana.